I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. And this is the I Hate Politics candidate interviews with Scott Joftis and Julie Yang from Montgomery County Board of Education, District 3. I'm Sunil Dasgupta, host of I Hate Politics. If you are new to the show, I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse, democratic, and sometimes divided societies. As part of the show, we have conversations with local, state, and sometimes federal candidates. Rather than ask them how they stand on a multitude of issues, these conversations try to get to the character of the candidate. The school board race in Montgomery County is unique. The entire county is eligible to vote for every seat on the board, even if it is designated as a district seat. Districting for the BOE races is only for candidacy. Only people living in a district can run in that district, but all eligible voters in the county can vote on every seat, even if a voter does not live in the district. BOE District 3 used to be held for a long time by Pat O'Neill, who died last fall. The BOE chose Scott Joftis, an education consultant, to replace her. But former school counselor Julie Yang is challenging Joftis in the primary elections in July. There are other candidates in the race, and the top two vote-getters will go to the general election in November 2022. One note about Julie Yang's interview, which you will hear cuts off in the middle. You should know the circumstances leading up to it. Midway through the interview, which I conduct on Zoom, there was a loud sound at Julie Yang's end. I asked her if she could look into that and pause the recording. Once she was back, I thought I had restarted the interview recording, but later found out that I had not. This was my mistake. I followed up with Yang to reschedule, but she told me that she would prefer not to. Even though the interview cuts off in the middle, you will see that it is wide-ranging and gives you a sense of Yang as a candidate. Music for this episode comes from Emily Hall, a DC-based singer-songwriter who grew up in Wheaton.
May the power of people rise above all the hatred and anger that leads us astray. Oh, I still believe in love today. No war that is fought can never be won. So lay down your weapons and throw out your guns. And don't be confused between what's black or white. Compassion's most powerful when we unite. 'Cause I believe in love, sweet love. May the power of people rise above all the hatred and anger that leads us astray. Oh, I still believe in love today.
Scott Joftis, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you so much, Sunil. It's great to be here.
You're running for the Board of Education. You've been an education consultant around the country. As you begin to observe MCPS up close, how do you see MCPS? What are the differences between other districts and MCPS? What are the similarities? How do you look at MCPS comparatively?
The similarity is that decisions get made in a sort of political context, and often the people who are getting the decisions made are those who have a lot of influence in the community, which means in way too many communities, those who are disenfranchised or have historically been underserved are not. And so I see that really consistently across the country, all those dynamics that I just mentioned, as well as I'm seeing here. I think a couple of differences here is that we are such a big, both in terms of number of students, certainly not the biggest, but I think we're the 15th largest district in the country, biggest in Maryland, but also big geographically. And the challenges of addressing the sort of needs, wants, concerns of students and families across a county of this size, and certainly diverse from a population standpoint, although there are other communities that are, as much or more in terms of diverse. But I think that adds to the challenge. And then the last thing I will say is that the engagement of families and other stakeholders is really, really high and really strong here. And I would say that that's a strength to the extent that we are getting to learn about what kinds of decisions we need to make and how to make them. But as I said, it can also be a challenge when those who are underserved, underrepresented are sort of being muffled out by those who have sort of more influence.
Okay. So what has been your suggestion to other districts faced with the problem that you just described, which is, and I'll be blunt about it, middle-class white parents driving the agenda in school districts?
So when we go in from a strategic planning, our first phase is to engage community. And so a couple of strategies that we've used, certainly pre-pandemic, was, we would open up focus groups in schools around the community that are that are serving the entire population. And it's really important in our mind to do that at different times of the day, to offer childcare services. So we often have staff who are available to watch children while their parents or older siblings are participating in focus groups and strategy sessions. What I was saying before is we work with the folks who have distributed food and computers because they have a really intimate knowledge of families who are often not part of the decision-making process, and we get help from them to engage. And then in some communities, what we've been able to do, we have the capacity to do focus groups in Spanish, but in some groups, like we were recently, or I guess it's now been a year or two ago, in Alexandria City, just south of where we are talking right now. And we had translators in multiple languages.
That you made the case that your educational consulting background gives you sort of advantages for being on the board. The measures you've suggested elsewhere are already generally in place, I believe, in MCPS. If they're already doing it, what are you adding?
I think what I add from my professional experience is everybody knows, everyone knows that we need to communicate effectively and engage effectively, or at least most people know that. I think the key is, though, how do you do that from a performance management perspective? And I that's a lot of my work with school districts.
Okay, tell me how. How should MCPS do it?
So I'll give you one example that's taking place right now. So across the country, districts are coming to a late realization, in my view, that the way we teach early literacy is not very effective. And what's typically been done in many of these districts is something called balanced literacy, which is an approach where teachers break students up into groups based on their reading abilities and provide different differentiated instruction for each of those groups. The challenges are managing 4 or 5 groups in a classroom, making sure if I'm working with group number 1, Sunil in group number 2 is staying focused.
Let me ask you a question about that, though. So the science of, reading and the phonics, a lot of this is old research, going back to the 70s. What is interesting to me here is why districts persist in suboptimal methods when clearly there are other methods available. What is your analysis of that?
So I haven't done a systemic analysis or systematic analysis of that, but I have a couple thoughts. I mean, one, I think goes back to your question about white middle-class parents and students. So 50+% of students are going to learn to read if we give them a basic support of around reading, give them level books that are interesting and engaging, help them out, and then sort of guide them through fluency and comprehension. But that leaves a lot of students who need more explicit instruction. And those students are often the ones who have less access to books growing up, and maybe are coming from a different, learning English as a second or third language and need more explicit instruction. And I think it's harder for teachers to do that and to work with these students, not because they don't want to.
Do you think that your colleagues on the board, or do you see any possibility of convincing your colleagues on the board to agree to a move towards structured reading programs, because they have had that choice in front of them for a number of years and they haven't made that choice?
Well, I don't know about the past. I'm not I haven't followed the sort of board workings very closely until recently. But I will say that this administration is really committed to it. And I don't think Dr. McKnight and her team have gotten enough credit for that, because a lot of that is sort of happening behind the scenes, and there's a lot hotter topic issues that people are debating. They've really started moving that in that direction. In fact, later this afternoon, someone on her leadership team asked me to meet with them, and we're going to talk through, my thinking about why these efforts are hard to do across other districts. And my perspective on that, I kind of started to say it earlier, is because we try to do too much too quickly. And there's lots of evidence and lots of research on this, that districts don't fail to do this kind of work because they're not working hard or they're not well-intentioned. It's because we're trying to throw so many big things and we're asking people to just kind of implement them successfully all at once. And so we need to work, start small, scale. We need to have a focus on implementation measures as well as impact measures. And we need to make adjustments along the way. There's a big movement right now around what's called improvement science, which is basically what I just outlined on steroids, where it's a very thoughtful and specific process to implement difficult change in districts. And I think that's an area where I can at least advise on this administration, which is completely committed to doing it.
What is fascinating to me about your answer is that you see the process of change in MCPS as talking to the MCPS administration, not setting BOE policy. That is just a very interesting perspective. Is that your view, that it's not the BOE that makes policy and it is really the administration that does it?
Sunil, I know you're being provocative, but I do not mean that, right? So I think there are two ways that a board member can make a difference, right? And I think a lot of people don't realize this. One is, despite what a lot of people, I think, who run for the board think, having a really strong idea and being really passionate about an idea is great, but that's not going to get it done, right? In order to get a policy passed by the board, which I do believe is the primary responsibility of the board, you need to have a majority. So it's relationship building, it's constituency building, and getting people to understand where you're coming from. And I think I have kind of the perspective and understanding of how to do that. The other way that a board member on his or her own can be influential is by being respected and having the ear of the administration and the superintendent and his or her senior team. And I think I've got that in a relatively short period of time. And I think I'll continue to build that over time. And there I can be influential by guiding decisions more behind the scenes based on my experience. A lot of decisions are administrative, and they should be administrative, right? The board is responsible for why and what, and the administration is responsible for when and how. And that's kind of a phrase that's used in board trainings, and that I completely agree with. You do not typically want board members, certainly from the board table, directing administrators on how to accomplish something that is their job to do.
A new curriculum decision, is that purely a administrative decision, or is that a board decision? What do you think?
I don't know. That's a really great question. So it's a board decision to say, or it's board appropriate to say, I don't think, or we don't think as a board that the way we're teaching literacy is effective. I'm not sure that it is a board appropriate thing to say, I want you to go in this direction to teach reading. I don't think that's our role, and that is what we pay our administrators to do.
Let me ask about another aspect of your consulting job. Education consulting is a business, right? Do you see any conflict of interest between your role as an education consultant and your role on the board?
No, I don't. But I'd be curious to hear what is underlying that question for you.
There may be a contract with Mcps that your educational consulting business may be vying for, or something that, you may be, sort of looking for a contract somewhere else as an education consultant, and your dual role as a Board of Education member in Montgomery County, and you're wearing a consultant hat, sort of, changes things in ways that perhaps, it should not.
Yeah, no, that's a good perspective. So I'll take those 2 points separately. So the first one is it's unethical and illegal for my company to get a job with Montgomery County Public Schools. And there's been some comment even about my wife's organization, which does have a contract with MCPS and has had it for several years and hopefully ongoing, that I will recuse myself and I cannot play any role in any decision at all regarding that. As far as the influence with other districts, I think that's a legitimate concern and question. I think it plays out in a very similar way, no matter what I did professionally, right? Because being on the board gives me access to decision makers and leaders at least in this community, that I wouldn't have if I weren't on the board. And does that give me a slight advantage in working with a different community? I don't know. It might. I don't see anything unethical or certainly not illegal about that. It gives me an additional experience and perspective that I think is helpful to other districts, just because I'm sitting in the seat and hope to continue sitting in the seat. And I think that is a perspective that could be helpful to other districts as well.
Okay. How do you think Title I has shaped Montgomery County schools?
On a relatively obvious approach or point that I'll make first is, it gives additional resources to schools that serve the highest concentrations of low-income students. So that's one obvious.
But that we concentrate all Title I funding to elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
Is that appropriate?
I think it's a legitimate, so districts approach that differently. And I think it's a strategic decision. Most districts do it that way. They choose to focus all their Title I dollars on elementary schools, which is allowed under Title I, because they view the importance of early literacy and early skill building as being critical to their students' further development. So putting additional resources there is a strategic choice, which I agree with. I think it's a good move.
A big part of our problem, especially when it comes to language learning, is actually in upper middle school and high school. That's where a lot of students come into the system without having English language skills. So if we are saying that we'll only focus this money on elementary school and not actually doing enough at that upper level, then we have a problem.
We do have a problem. There are other resources that are geared towards middle school and high school. Montgomery County has a relatively high per pupil spending rate across the board. And we are extremely highly, in fact, we are the number one district in the country. I learned this recently in terms of the percentage of the monies we spend on staff. So I think 91% of our $2.9 billion budget goes to staff. And that's the highest percentage of any district in the country, which I found fascinating.
We may be spending 91% of the budget on staff, but it seems we have critical staff shortages no matter how much we spend. And it's not just new. I mean, this is not just pandemic related. We've had this problem for several years. And in case of mental health workers, that's been a really long-standing problem with no solution, right? So in some ways, to say we spend 91% is fascinating. Yes, it is. But to me, juxtaposing it with the staff shortage is very, very, sort of interesting. Are you really spending that money correctly?
Oh, I mean, that's the $1 million question, right?
Apparently it's $2.9 billion.
Pardon? Yeah, the $2.9 billion question. That's an area that I want to really look into more. We're going through the operating budget right now. We've had open sessions where the administration has presented their proposal. We've had lots of community input and need to get a lot more. And to your point earlier too, there is a political aspect to this without any question. So then the question becomes, given the political dynamic of how we're spending the money, is that really the best way we can do it? And where do we need to make adjustments? We have I think a really excellent report that was commissioned a couple of years ago prior to me being on the board that has, I think, some really thoughtful ideas that we need to explore. And I need to just continue right now to learn more about that, because it's a lot, right? And
what is this political dynamic that you're speaking about? When you said there's a political dynamic that determines this, what is it? Can you explain the political dynamic?
I can try. You might be able to do it better than I can, but I would say that it's in shaping the budget, you're making choices, right? Do we spend more money on, I'll give you I think a kind of a fascinating micro example, which is there's a position called 504 coordinators, which play a really important role for students who need accommodations in their learning. And they are not able to serve as many students, we hear, because they're doing so much paperwork. And so there's a couple of ways to approach that, right? You can hire more 504 coordinators. You could hire a staff, almost like an administrative staff, which would be a lower paid, less qualified position to try to take some of the paperwork off of those staff. And you can look at other responsibilities that those 504 coordinators have, which I'm not aware of right now, but maybe they're also involved in, administering tests, for example. And we can think about, how do we take them out of those other responsibilities? You can have that same conversation with almost every single person, every single position.
Before you appointed Dr. McKnight to be the superintendent, the teachers union had a vote of no confidence against her. And then the principals union came out with a fairly striking and stern letter of disapproval of her policies. Now, you have appointed her despite those reservations. How do you repair this going forward?
I think your implied question there is, why did we choose her despite that vote of those votes of no confidence? I think a couple things about that. So first of all, we really value, obviously, how our teachers feel about their leadership. We did believe that vote of no confidence was a focus primarily on how COVID has been handled. And it's totally understandable. I think they felt not heard about their concerns going into schools that they felt were unsafe, that we weren't taking seriously their recommendations for making sure that they were safe. And that's fair. And we've heard that loud and clear. And I think, we are working really hard to address that. We think that Dr. McKnight is the best choice for this district at this time. And we valued the feedback that we received from the teachers union, as well as many, many other groups during this process. And we feel like the specific concerns that the teachers have are both being addressed, and hopefully won't be as big of a deal as we are hopefully coming out of this situation. So how do we respond to that now going forward? Is, we continue to engage them, and we're of course in the process of negotiating their contract for this coming year, for the upcoming year. And my understanding is that that's gone really well. We've been, I think the negotiations have been really positive. They've been focused on interests on both sides and an understanding on both sides of what needs are. And I think we're at agreement. If not, we're really, really close and ready for both sides to officially approve it. So I think we're starting taking the steps to address those concerns, and I think we will demonstrate that to them, that we are taking them seriously and wanting to do a better job of engaging them.
Okay. MCPS has made several missteps with opening and closing of schools. They did it in the 2021 school year, again at the start of the 2021-22 school year in August and September of 21, and then yet again during the Omicron crest. Do you think someone in MCPS should be held responsible for those mistakes?
I don't know exactly if you mean, should somebody be fired? I don't think so. I think people have been trying really hard. The work has been imperfect, right? There's been an acknowledgement at the administration that they need to beef up their capacity around crisis response, communications, and operations, certainly as it relates to, for example, the bus situation, which we haven't even talked about. But I think that work is taking place, and I believe that this superintendent is the right person to make it happen.
Scott Joftis, thank you for coming on Ahead Politics. Good luck in the campaign.
Thank you so much, Sunil. I really appreciate it.
Come sunshine or rain, I still love you the same. 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 I am you and you are me.
That was education consultant Scott Joftis, running for Montgomery County Board of Education, District 3. You can find out more about him at Joftis, 4BOE.com. And you can follow him on Twitter at Scott Joftis. Next up is Julie Yang. I want to point out again that my interview with her cuts off in the middle. We lost that audio and were not able to reschedule another interview. What remained of the truncated interview is wide-ranging and should give you a sense of Yang as a candidate.
May the power of people rise above all the hatred and
Julie Yang, welcome to Ahead Politics.
Hi, Sunil. Glad to be here.
You identified mental health as a leading challenge in MCPS. Why did you identify mental health over other things, such as COVID response or learning?
All those issues are important. But first of all, we need to get our students ready to learn. Okay, I am running because of this issue, because I believe I can make a difference to get our students ready to learn. And I am an educator, and so I think I have a lot to contribute in this matter. So now I have seen firsthand the downward spiral of our students' mental health. I run the College and Career Center at Magruder High School until last December. Now, after returning to school after 18 months of virtual learning, many students openly share with me how anxious and depressed they are. They worry about their schoolwork. They worry about getting along with others. They worry about their future. So for a 10th grader, they have never been into the building, and the pressure is tremendous. I can see they have mental exhaustion. Kids will come into my career center during lunch and just put their head on the desk or go sit on the rocking chair. So, but the whole month of October, Sunil, the crazy thing is we were doing testing almost every single day to a different group of kids in the building. And I know that that is a lot of state mandated tests, but this does not help our student group. Now, I'm passionate about this issue because I personally have experienced this with my family member. So my worst parenting moment was driving through a snowstorm to get to a mental health support worker for my child. So I really would like us to see us to provide support for our students. Our students are going through the snowstorms now, and we have to have the will to drive through the snowstorm to provide them with help.
Yes, so COVID did make the mental health condition of our students worse. But, in the county, we have been talking about this mental health support deficit for a long time, maybe almost 10 years. So do you have an understanding of why we haven't fixed the problem before?
Mental health issue is not new. Okay, I do feel this time people feel the urgency. Now, when people feel the urgency, they will act But however, I don't want it to be just a short-term Band-Aid fixed. As a board member, I see the need of putting mental health issues and challenges into one of our regular committees, standing committees. I don't have all the solutions, but I know that I have a few good ideas too. And then by working with the board and working with the community, we might catch this moment, catch this momentum, and really make some changes. For example, mental health issue is not 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. issue or Monday to Friday issue. We know that it's a 24/7 issue for our students. Then, so when we are providing support and making sure our kids are ready to learn, ideas about increasing counselors, social workers, psychologists are all very good. And I support all of them. But in addition, I think they need to create a healthcare provider networks. We can work with local healthcare providers, DHHS. Now DHHS has a mobile crisis hotline. We should make everyone aware of them. They have a care network of care for behavioral health network that can be strengthened and expanded. And we talk about telehealth. Actually, telehealth doesn't have to limit in the DMV area. During the pandemic, I secure telehealth mental health workers in Missouri to help my child who's living here at home. So we got to think a little bit broader. So if we have a committee and we are always looking at this, we are always working on this, then I think we can make significant improvement in this area.
What specific things do you propose to do to make this actually happen?
And it's by bringing every stakeholder to talk about it and to have buy-in. I think we do have buy-in now from this time and what you have seen in the past few weeks, that there is buy-in. So I think it's very possible. And another thing I want to talk about is when we talk about mental health, one of the goals we have is to promote a school culture that will foster community relationship building. So this is what I see. So for example, if I am in the school building, I'm in the career center, I offer a lot of programmings for students, helping them to do college and career exploration. But I don't start out the conversation with the individual students by ripping out their transcript. I start out the conversation by asking them their experiences, their interests, their likes, their dislikes, and their dreams. So this relationship building will help students.
Do you think currently counselors are not trained enough to do it the way that you have been doing it?
So counselors are doing it, but there aren't enough counselors.
How many do you think we need? Where is the money coming from?
Okay, so very good question. So there are a lot of ideas of how to increase the counselors. So there are several ideas. So one of the challenges we understand is that budget is a limit. Right now, we have the CARE Act money that we will be able to provide additional staffing. Another challenge is there might not be as many counselors available now, but there are other ideas out there to handle this. For example, there are community Chicago Public Schools implemented a program called community ambassadors, mental health ambassadors. So what they do is they train community members to be mental health support for their high school students. This is a wonderful way to actually include a diverse background and increase cultural sensitivity when we provide the mental health support for students.
MCPS had problems bringing in parents to help with lunch during the pandemic, and you are asking for community ambassadors to come and help with mental health. How is that possible, you think?
I want to get back to your question, say where to find those community ambassadors first. Okay, so after the Magruder shooting, on that Tuesday, there were overwhelmingly support at Magruder High School. And I heard many of those support persons, and not every one of them are MCPS employees. Some of them are community members that just showing their support for the school and using their expertise to provide, support. So I think there is the need. Now, what you say, what is my role? I want to go back to your saying, what will be my role as a board member? Okay, as a board member, we were talking about creating a school culture that foster relationship building, right? So as a board member, I think it's very important that when we make school policies or when we evaluate or decide on issues, that we look through the length of its impact on student and staff mental health. For example, we're talking about, and by doing, you do this by talking to students and staff and community stakeholders. So for example, we have a lot of good intentions, right? So once schools implemented Wellness Wednesday, which is a great idea. On Wednesdays, they don't give out assignments or tests. But in reality, when they practice that, students find that assignments and tests are heavier on Tuesday and Thursday, and it becomes more stressful.
What tools do you really have to address that kind of, perverse incentive?
So that is when you are able to talk to the students, understanding their needs, and really, as the board member, urge and look through that are any practices really helping or not helping. And there's definitely a role we can play here.
Most board members have been around for a long time and have ignored other people's pleas for greater mental health support. Why would they agree to your arguments?
Thank you so much. So I have pride myself to be a bridge builder. Okay, so my experience have been, Sunil, so I was a classroom teacher for 7 years. And I, prior to joining MCPS, within MCPS, I have worked 11 years in 3 high school clusters. Walter Johnson High School Cluster, BCC High School Cluster, and Magruder High School Cluster. All clusters with very different needs and challenges. So I have a variety of experience. So my last role as the college and career coordinator, so I work at school with 40% low income, 40% farm students, 40% first gen college going students. So I was able to implement many programs and work closely with students and bring a bridge between them and their future. And I have increased our college attending rate and career planning rate. Now, I'm also, as a community member, I have advocating, giving voice for the people that don't have a voice. So in 2019, I started a program called the Village Initiative, which helps students with young families with autism students to connect them to services within MCPS or other community organizations. So I was a bridge to for those families.
Do you see any difference between the skill sets required of a college career counselor in MCPS and the skill sets required of a board member for Montgomery County? I mean, are those skill sets different, or do you see that they are the same thing?
No, they're not the same thing. They have differences, but many skill sets are transferable. Okay. For one thing is, as a school board member, you have to look at the big picture. You are in a governor's role. And I have experience forming and establishing an advisory council. I have experience of organizing parents to get them participate in MCPS. And I actually, when you run a college, a career center, I actually revamp the whole program and make it the way that I envision most helpful to our students. So the relationship building, the planning, the execution, many skills are transferable into this new position. And most of all, I think as a board of ed member, you need to care about the students.
I would imagine every board member cares about students.
And our policies student centered.
I would imagine every board member says that their policies are student centered.
I have been the boots on the ground and really know what's happening in our schools. So I feel like I would like us to bring us back though to the mental health piece. There's one more thing I want to say. One of my goals is I want us to be better prepared for next time. So increase student resiliencies. So we need to equip our students with skill sets and tools so that we are better off next time if there's a crisis happen.
What are those skills and tools?
Okay, so we always talk about student social emotional learning. And I see it's necessary to teach those skills, starting from our young students in elementary school. And this do bring me back to the counselor issue. So the tools about identifying feelings and the tools about conflict resolutions. Now, elementary school, I do have to mention, is one counselor or 1.5 counselor to the whole school. And that's 1 to 500 and 1 to 700. And I believe that need to be changed. And I believe that's something we need to invest money. Now, budget, when we want to do something, we say we have the money. When we don't want to do something, we say, oh, we don't have the money. But we really, here is where we will say, if we institute all these things, then we will be able to see results that improve our students' mental well-being.
What are you looking at? What numbers? There are 130 or so elementary schools. Are you looking at 130 more counselors for elementary schools? Is that what you're looking at? And that, I'm not even talking about middle and high schools, which are also in need, right? So what is a total number that seems to you that is reasonable to get the actual service delivered?
I believe that the 130 counselors for the elementary school level is reasonable. And that's something as a system we should strive for.
How much money is that? Is that like $13 million?
That's about $13 million, yes. You did your math. You did your calculation. Yeah, it is. But so, Sunil, okay, are we looking at Band-Aids? So when we talk about, you mentioned, say, mental health is not a new issue. So are we looking, now MCPS now put out a 50 social worker hiring, putting out 70 psychologists hiring. Now, these are to help our students when they already have issues that need support. Now, in health, we all understand, Sunil, that treatment is very important, but prevention is just as important as treatment. So if we are looking at 130, if we are talking about not Band-Aid fixes, then we need to talk about starting young to equip our students so we will be better prepared and provide them with the tools they can handle the crisis and stress, Sunil.
We just calculated $13 million extra for counselors only for elementary schools, not talking about the psychologists, not talking about the social workers that are, maybe perhaps in the process. Where is the $13 million going to come from?
So, Sunil, we are a county that will get funding from the federal, state, and local government. And so we need to, so if we just say we can't pay for it, we'll never change it. I will work with our county council and the state delegates and find the funding streams. This is something that I believe on the board, many of the colleagues on the board will agree. This is something that we need to do.
I think they are agreed. But the puzzle is that they haven't been able to do much about it.
Thank you. Then eventually we need to do something, and now is the time to do it.
Okay, let me ask you about something else. You mentioned resilience. What do you mean by the term resilience?
Okay, so resilience is the able to cope, the ability to cope, the ability to overcome challenges. So that's what I call resilience. So yeah, our body, physical body has a healing ability, and we use medicine to help us heal. When we are mentally not ill, we also need to heal. And by receiving services or rest or have strategies that we can improve our mental health. Yeah, so that's part of the, have a lot of like Maryland passed a bill on giving student mental health days. That's a positive movement. Mental health days are actually excused days now for students. And we have...
How many do they get?
They didn't say a limitation, but schools will need documentations, just like regular illness, right? Past 3 days, you will need to have a physician's note, or that's how students can be excused.
Are you familiar with this debate, particularly in the African American community, that says, don't ask me for resilience, give me the resources?
I'm so glad you mentioned that. I heard about that. I need to learn more about that. Now, I feel that when I talk about resilience, I'm talking about providing resources, equipping students with tools, providing them with supports for them to develop. So it's not like that I'm just saying you are doing on your own. So that's the whole time what we're talking about. Yeah.
I'm getting some feedback from your end.
Okay, so let me see. There is, I also hear a noise too. Can we pause? And
I'll pause. That was my truncated interview with former MCPS career counselor Julie Yang, running for Montgomery County Board of Education, District 3. Despite the interview being cut off, it does capture Yang's central election argument focused on student mental health. You can find out more about Julie Yang at julieyang.org, and you can follow her on Twitter at JulieYangMoko. That's all for this episode. Music for this episode comes from DC-based singer-songwriter Emily Hall. I hope you will listen, like, and share the show as we bring you stories about politics close to you and your home. See you next time.
Shadows. I've been traveling the world just to feel it spin. is pure joy, and I've witnessed deep suffering. Felt so numb, I just wanna stand still. Better practice my will. Let it move, just let it move on through. In the power of expression, we find the connection to live our truth. I've been trying to learn how to face the sadness. I've been trying to learn how to feel this grief. From moments of love to moments of loneliness, I surrender in gratitude for